Stargazing from Babylon represents a big change of pace, change of approach in terms of my songwriting. A lot of times, especially when dealing with an acoustic song, what I would tend to do is start with guitar chords and kind of work my way up from there once I had the skeleton of the song. And that served me very well for a long time, but it was also mean that a lot of my songs kind of sound the same. So just to change it up as much as anything else, on some songs I wanted to kind of reverse that, or at least create the illusion that I was reversing that, by basically starting from riffs and melodies and adding the rest of the song from there. Now, I'm not a good enough musician or composer to truly do that the way some other musicians can, basically because I'm borderline tone deaf. But how I got around that was I started with a guide track with the virtual guitar instruments and the various accompaniment features. And I used this to also sort of do a loose structuring of the song within the timeline of GarageBand itself. And I started using this more often just to have some kind of a visual reference for where to add certain elements of the song and kind of get an idea of whether or not a given song is working before I really get into anything. So I intentionally undermixed it on this song, but it still remains in the overall version. Sorry, the final version. This is my guide track to Stargazing from Babylon. With some very simple finger picking. It helped me establish a mood as well. Okay. And once I started establishing the mood and a general structure for the song, I started to embellish on riffs and melody lines. Some which, like for straight verse lines and the initial chorus parts, I admit I copied and pasted to a certain extent. But as the song progressed, particularly towards the break in the chorus, I freewheeled it a little bit more. In any event, the reason why I have a more atmospheric or more unusual sound to the lead guitar part on the song, I was sort of inspired by Brian May's live guitar solos, especially when he plays in Queen. In that, if you don't know, he often plays with these various delay effects. It started out as a tape delay, and now for a while now it's been a digital effect. But in any event, the idea is that he sort of plays against the counterpoint of himself. Actually, two of them. And while I didn't want to overtly copy that, I love the general effect that it made. So I started experimenting with how that could transfer to an acoustic guitar. Sort of with the conceit being that you take I'm not privy enough with the exact terms, but I guess like an acoustic electric hybrid guitar that is rigged for various pickups, and try to experiment with how real effects pedals would work with that. And in the verse sections, it's pretty straightforward. This is basically just an echo pedal with a little bit of gain and EQ adjustments from the clean amp. But we're about to get into the chorus here, and this is where things got interesting. This is where I add more overt echo, and I basically turn on the treble booster. The reason why I have these in separate parts, by the way, is simply because I can't switch pedals on and off on the fly with the virtual instruments. So I was basically feeling the song out from there. A lot of times with songs, I have a reasonably specific idea going into it, how I want a song to sound. But I think starting with this one, starting with Stargazing, I wanted to kind of start with, make sure that the melody worked on its own and then kind of work around that. So that's when I added the bass. And somewhere in the midst of all of this, I don't think I was even playing to a click track at this point. It just sort of occurred to me that it lent itself to a more exotic percussion than I typically use. So rather than any kind of a rock drum kit, I used a more Latin influence, and as you can see, the Quincy preset in the virtual drummers. So basically left untreated other than a couple of bell passes for the occasional fill, and using a heck of a lot of reverb just to give it space. That's super important when you're dealing with virtual drums. And that's basically it, other than a keyboard track that I have coming in right about here in the second verse. I won't bother isolating it, but I just want to have a little bit of variety because this isn't an instrumental song. You have a bit more of a build in the arrangements. Okay, the only other thing to talk about is, I guess, the title, because it kind of begs some explanation. I started this thing untitled. As you can tell, I was sort of figuring out this song as I went along. And for some reason, just the phrase Stargazing from Babylon popped into my head. I think that's because I'm an uber sci-fi nerd, and I was thinking of Captain Picard's old ship from Star Trek The Next Generation, combined with the title Space Station from Babylon 5. I'm not exactly sure why that combination came to my head, but it did prompt me to look up, out of curiosity, the actual Babylon society from ancient times. And it turned out to be very appropriate because I found out that Babylon in its day was an extremely advanced society that basically fell into disrepair and ruin from the inside. And it was very telling, in my opinion, of where North America is these days, with, well, populism seemingly bound and determined to take us apart bit by bit. And I guess the stargazing element came into that just from a kind of romantic, semi-spiritual ideal of somebody looking outward for guidance, escape, take it as however you will, but just realizing what the society could have been, where it's heading, and, well, just letting his mind wander elsewhere.